I'm glad you're here because I think it's just second week of classes, and for a lot of students, you know, they're busy, and I don't know if they may realize how the workshops can help. This particular student success workshop is starting off strong, 5 habits for college success. I just recently went to a workshop on brain research, and this is a wonderful book. One of them that they mentioned there is The Owner's Manual for the Brain. And it's really interesting. It's very consumable in terms of it's easy to read. You don't have to have, you know, anatomy or physiology. It does go into the parts of the brain, but what's really wonderful about it is it breaks down learning and the implications with new brain research. It's really exciting for me. I teach a college success course on campus, so I'm very interested in learning theory and things like that that relate to how we learn and process information and memory. So what's so exciting is with the new technology is that they can do brain research now, and they're finding out when you're learning in a foreign language, what part of the brain is being activated, where do we store different types of memory. So the implication as it relates to learning is some of the way we structure learning doesn't work really well with how we learn naturally. So we don't have a lot of control sometimes on how the textbook that the teacher uses, the way in which the teacher teaches the class. So as students, kind of knowing who you are and how you are as a learner can really help you to adapt to different learning situations, whether it be work, whether it be a class or anything. So that's why it's really exciting to me. I've been teaching at Cuesta for a long time, but I haven't lost my enthusiasm for learning. And it's like this ongoing thing. And I think that's the part where learning is really fun. And they even have a segment in there about how laughter is cheap medicine. It's a good way to help with learning and oxygenate the brain, exercise. So it's really an interesting book. And I'm going to see if they have it in the library. And have you been to the new library? Have you seen it? It's nice, isn't it? I'm going to see if they have this in the library, and if they don't, I'm going to see about getting a copy there so that it might be a reference. Before I get too far ahead of myself, I'd like you to just get a piece of paper out, if you have a piece of paper, and I want you to write down what you think might be 5 habits for success in college. What do you think might be 5 habits? So you're coming to the workshop, and this is one of the things where you want to think about what you already know. Like how many of you, this is your first semester here, this semester? Oh, so how many of you been here a couple semesters? Okay, so you have experience of the system and what works and what doesn't work for you. So that's a great point of reference, yes.
Is this something we're going to turn in, or we'll just keep it quiet?
No, thank you. No, it's just for yourself. You're just going to jot down. And the reason I'm having you do that is because you're active. Now, as a teacher, I always have to override the compulsion to talk while you're writing because multitasking is hard to do. It's hard to listen at the same time you're writing things down. Also, in terms of learning theory, I'm asking you to do something that's activating what you already know, prior knowledge, whether it's experiential, whether it's from something you've heard before, or what you think might make a student successful. What's interesting about that is we learn from what we already know. And by asking questions right away to kind of see, okay, what do you think? It gets you thinking about what we're going to be talking about today. And that's a really important link in terms of remembering things. We don't tend to remember things if we don't have any connection to it. So obviously the fact that you're here today shows, even though you may be getting extra credit, many of you, there's other extra credit along the way, have shown some value in what might be presented today. That's like, oh, I want this. I want to be successful. And that's a good motivator. That's an intrinsic motivator. The external motivator might be that you get extra credit, you might do better in your classes. Those are great. But you also have a desire to do better and find out what those are. Okay, so would you just lean over to the person next to you or behind you and just say, what'd you put? What were your top 5? Just kind of talk to one another. What were your top 5? Good. Now I'm curious. Did you have some that were the same? What were some of the things that kind of 5 habits for college success? What were some that you came up with? Just what were some?
Studying.
Study. Study.
Attendance.
Attendance. Did anybody else have attendance? Regular class attendance, really important.
Participation in class.
Participating in class. You just participated in the workshop. And you know what? It's going to help you run those neural traces and make it stay longer in your memory because there's a connection. You did something. Instead of sitting there passively, you've done something already, and you're already thinking about it. All of this I'm talking about, it's obvious, but it's also something you think about if you're in a class where it's straight lecture and you don't have a lot of interaction. Why it's really important to take notes in that class is because you're making yourself be active, even though it may not be as active. So these are excellent suggestions: regular attendance, studying, participating in class. Did you have any others?
Having tutoring.
The what is it?
Having tutoring.
Oh, getting academic tutoring. That's a great resource. How many of you know about the tutoring center that we have? That it's great. Obviously, a lot of students do because over 200 and some students already signed up, and we're just at the beginning of the second week. So that's a great thing. Yes, that's available to you as Cuesta students for free. So what I'd like to do is, I think that these were things that I would imagine that you would come up with. And that's why today, you'll notice, and what I decided to do with my handout there is, here's the rest of the workshops. I have a very ambitious agenda of what I'm going to talk about today, but there's handouts for it. So what I wanted to do is maybe expand those good suggestions that you had to some other things, aspects that I think are really important for college success that are pretty comprehensive. And I can kind of do this in a very short period of time because it's just to get you thinking about other things. And if you'll notice the notes of the workshop, the first, I have 5 things there. The first is self-knowledge, awareness of your strengths and weaknesses. So it's kind of like a self-knowledge database, and I'm going to talk about that. And then knowing about resources. That's the second one. Now, if you want to write on this, great. If you want to jot a few things down on a piece of paper, it's just fine. Knowing about resources, some of you mentioned tutoring, websites, the Cuesta College web page. There's all the departmental pages. There's a lot of resources on those. Making connections is number 3, and that's with your instructors, with the office hours, your classmates in your classes. It's really important, especially when you're transitioning. So your first semester here, you're moving from another area, you're a re-entry student coming back to school. That's a big transition, and it's not just about the academics. It's about scheduling, balancing work, family. It's having a support group here. How will you, so it's a real balancing act, and there's things that we can do to make that transition smoother. Number 4, with that said, time management and organizational skills. That's a huge piece for college success. And I broke that down into 2 parts: managing your time more efficiently and effectively, and then organizing your life for success in college. And so it's much more than just showing up to your classes and doing the work. It's really our finances and our health and our relationships and work and social. So it's all, how do we tie that all together? And then the last one, the 5th one, is cultivating a systematic approach to learning. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart, and it relates to the brain research, is that there's specific ways in which you can structure how you study, and it differs with every class and every instructor. And if you have some habits or some strategies, the likelihood of you being successful in college is really enhanced. So this is really a good thing. So it's my conviction that most students do not lack the innate intelligence to be successful. It's skills, how to manage their time, how to study their textbooks. For example, a textbook in math and science is structured very differently than in, say, psychology or sociology class. So knowing that before you go in to read that chapter, you may read it at a totally different rate. How you're tested, you may be tested in the math and sciences much more heavily on your textbook, where in the other one you may have study guides and it's on lecture. So you want to know that before you start preparing for your test so you save yourself time. Have you ever had that experience where you studied the wrong things? And then it's frustrating because you did study, it just wasn't a good match for what the requirements were. So then it just goes first week survival, organizing your time, organizing your notebook, organizing your assignments, organizing your note-taking, your reading, and test preparation. So it's just a little bit of an overview. Some of these pointers you may already be using, which is great. And then I have some pointers on making a study schedule. So what I want to say is I'm going to touch on all 5 of these areas in the course of the presentation, but there are materials that will help further define what I mean. And if you're interested to go ahead and read those. We all know what a study schedule is, but do you ever think about studying your more difficult subject first? Or what's your best time of day? And how that would make studying more efficient. So there's little things like that. Thank you. Here's another one, succeeding in college, 10 mistakes to avoid. This is always kind of funny because you think about, do I do those things? It's the secrets of getting through college isn't so much brain power as it is willpower and time management. And so again, that idea that most students don't lack the innate ability to be successful in school, it's skills, and time management is a big one. Have you ever procrastinated on studying for a test? Or been behind with reading assignments? That's time management. It's not about, intelligence per se. It's a skill. So I think that's where there's some good suggestions, and you can look at what you do instead. The next page, somebody interviewed me from the Questonian, our school newspaper, and so they wanted to ask me about college success. So they've quoted me on a few things, but also other students. And one of your suggestions, my best advice, this is from a student, not mine, my best advice is that all new students attend their classes religiously. Isn't that interesting? That's one of the things you came up with in your what you thought too. And then they have Cheryl Zeal's top 10 pointers for new students. I go, this was kind of embarrassing when they did this, but actually it's good. There's some good stuff in there. And then there's a study reading, the Soprano method of note-taking, how to mark your textbook. So I'm overviewing these. Obviously you can read them when you have some time to further explore them. What's interesting about this is all our lives we're told, don't write in your textbook, right? You say, don't write in your textbook. Now, when you write in your textbook, a lot of people, they don't know how to write in their textbook. What does that mean, to write in your textbook, and why should I? Well, because when you write or highlight or mark in your textbook, you don't have to reread the whole thing. You can kind of put little key ideas as a trigger to your memory. So it is really a good skill, but to just randomly use a yellow highlighter and highlight everything, that's actually worse. Then what you didn't highlight stands out as important. So being able to be really selective, the general rule is only about 10 to 15% of what you highlight actually is what you should do. So you always want to think about that. And so this is a good way that for everything you highlight, you have to generate a test question. So imagine that. Obviously, you reduce the amount you highlight, or you get really selective. So that's a real skill. And then the last couple of handouts are about reading rate and how you don't read everything at the same rate. And it gives you some specifics about if you're doing analytical reading, if you're skimming or scanning, and how that, what kinds of things might you be reading quickly. It doesn't matter, you're not going to be tested on it. It's just for information. You can just get the information quickly, as opposed to something where you may have to read it once, reread it a couple times to really get the content. If you think about, in general, college textbooks, the purpose of college textbooks, especially introductory college textbooks, is to introduce you to the discipline, biology, government, and so it tends to be factual based, expository writing that basically has a lot of facts and details. And then, so there's certain ways to read that kind of writing as opposed to a magazine or newspaper or something like that. Okay? And the rest of those papers have to do with that. And then the last one, put a star on it. It's really important. Before you leave today, and any students that have ever had me in a class, I spend a lot of time working with students on how to predict test questions. Now, how many of you do this already? You kind of get a feeling in your classes when teacher. How do you know a teacher's going to test you on something or it's important? How do you know? How do you do that?
The assignment they gave you the day before?
Oh, the assignment they gave you the day before sometimes might be if they give you a pop quiz or something, or ask you about it. That's a good way. What's another way teachers let you know something's important? They put it on the board. They write it on the board. They repeat it, right? Repetition. They emphasize it. Sometimes at the end of class they go, now we've talked about many things today, but especially important, or in summary, or in conclusion, those are flags. And my suggestion to you is whenever an instructor, you get this feeling that an instructor is going to quiz you on something, make a little note in your notes, like a test question or some kind of symbol in your notes, so that when you're reviewing your notes at a later point, you'll make sure to spend a little more time on that. Everything's not equal. In the textbook, everything's not equal. In lecture, everything's not equal. Some things are more important and some things are less important. So writing it on the board, repetition, those are all really good indicators that might be on the test in the future. And we've all done that, where we have this feeling that it's going to be on the test and we don't study it any differently. And then we see it on the test and you go, I knew he was going to ask that question, but we didn't study it differently. Okay, so that's a really good way to just kind of help with that process. And the reason I wanted you to put a little star on this particular handout is it talks about the different levels of thinking and how that relates to test. And at the end of the workshop, I'm going to talk about predicting test questions, some specifics that you can leave this workshop with and use in your classes that I think will really help you. It's kind of like a game. You can get really good. How many of you are already kind of getting good at predicting test questions, or kind of getting a feeling, or just kind of noticing how your teachers say things? Okay? Well, hopefully that's something that we could really cultivate. I do have one other handout that I'll give at the end of the workshop, and that's just an organizational piece, a semester at a glance, which is just basically our big schedule, when we have vacation, when we have breaks. This is important. The final schedule, which is on the back of this, and then some assignment sheets, which is just a good way to keep track. Organization is an important school skill, so just to keep track of your assignments. So that's just some things that I'll give you. All right, are there any questions about what I've said so far? All right, so what I'd like you to do is on that piece of paper, and you're not going to turn this in, I want you to write, what do you want to get out of this workshop? What would you like to get out of this? What would you like to get from this workshop today? Yes?
Motivation to do better and actually have the skills to do it.
Okay, so motivation to do better and the skills to do better. That's good. And you know, if you have the skills, that helps with motivation, doesn't it? Because you feel like you can be successful at something, so that's a good one. Yes, I think we can talk about some of that. Certainly start it today. What else do you want?
Myself is like having a better idea, like how to apply, how to manage my time to really, like you say, avoid procrastination.
Okay, so that's a big one, isn't it? How do I manage my time and also avoid procrastination, which is unhealthy? Over time, if we procrastinate, it's stressful. You know, a lot of times we think a procrastinator, oh, they have so much time because they don't do anything. No, they're never free. They're always thinking about what they should have done, what they have to do, and it's stressful. It can really stress you out. So that's a really important thing. So time management's a really important piece as it relates to college success. Good. Any others? Share what you want? Yes.
I put better study skills and better organization.
Okay. Better study skills and organization. That's great. Well, we're certainly going to start on those today. And obviously, in 50 minutes, it's just kind of a start. But even if it just gets you thinking about, and that intention of, you know, I really want to study more effectively. I don't want to spend hours doing homework and still not knowing what I need to study or how to study it. It's discouraging, and you don't want to do that. So it's really about acquiring skills or habits. And, you know, think about habits. What do you think of when you think of habits? Tell me what you think.
Good and bad habits.
We think of good and bad habits. That's good, because usually when we think habits, what do we think? They're bad, I should not do that, right? But we have good habits as well. And I'm going to talk about some good habits today. And then it's all really about cultivating these good habits. And if you can go away, when I go to a workshop or a presentation, you know, a lot of times I think if I can get one or two things that I can use, it's worth it to me. That I can, because, you know, a lot of times we have these expectations like, I'm going to make these sweeping changes, but we're creatures of habit. Habit are things that are repetitive. We're usually not too aware of what we're doing, and they can be good or bad. So just by the fact that you're here, you're open to the possibility of doing things differently, that's a big start in terms of change of habits. So you want to look at what have been your approaches to school and your habits, and then know that not right now, but in the future, you can look through some of these pointers, and I think you'll get some good suggestions in here that will really help you with this process. So I'm going to start with number 1 here. I am going to move quickly because before you leave, I want to make sure that I give you the 2 gems in predicting test questions and a little piece on 168 hours in a week. A few little time management pointers, okay? All right, so self-knowledge, awareness of strengths and weaknesses. We are by nature natural learners. We're wired to learn. It's so amazing. The brain loves learning. It's excited about it. It's taking in information. And if any of you have been around kids, you know what I'm talking about. They're constantly asking questions. They're trying to make sense of things. It's this kind of enthusiasm and love of learning. That's what you want to bring. Your natural, instinctive desire to learn and curiosity to any learning situation. And the best way to do that is to find out who and how you are as a learner. What I'm talking about here is learning styles. Do you know? Are you an auditory or a visual or a kinesthetic learner? Are you right brain or left brain dominant? It's a really good way of looking at. There's online inventories that you can take. There's classes. The career exploration class has you take a personality mosaic. So there's lots of things out there. If I were to do a search on the internet on learning styles, I'd probably come up with like 7 million responses to that. What you need to know is the way I like to preface learning styles is it's the way that tends to work best for you to learn, and it's pretty automatic. So I refer to learning styles as preferences. So if we're talking about preferences, and then I'll talk about non-preference. So something so simple, group, whatever. Fold your hands. Just fold your hands right now. And some of you will have the left thumb over the right, and some of you will have the right thumb over the left. Now just unlock your hands and reverse it. It feels strange, doesn't it? It kind of feels, doesn't feel natural to us. Now, how many of you are right-handed or left-handed? One of you or one or the other. I'd like you to pick up your pen with the opposite hand. So if you're right-handed, pick up with the left. If you're left-handed, pick up with the right. And now write the word preference with your non-preferred hand. Go ahead. You're not turning any of this in. You don't need to worry about it. Isn't that strange? No, I can't even talk to you. You're still working on writing preferences with your non-preferred hand. Well, the point of this is when we work with our style or our preference, it tends to feel more comfortable. In addition, it requires less energy. It's easier. Right? Now that isn't good or bad. It's just kind of a preference. It's kind of how we like to do things, and it comes very natural. So it's natural for us. Now on the other hand, what did it feel like for you when you wrote with your non-preferred hand?
Harder.
It was definitely more work, wasn't it? It's less comfortable. It requires more energy. That's my little sign for more. And it's more difficult. Now, if you've ever injured a hand or a foot and have had to utilize your non-preferred hand or foot, we do adapt to a certain extent. And over time, it could be more comfortable. So when we're talking about learning styles or preferences, what you realize is that some situations, some learning environments are kind of more comfortable than others. And a big part of it as a student is adapting to the different levels, even though it's not our natural way of thinking, how we normally like to do things. We have to kind of adapt. So that self-awareness is a really important piece, is knowing, let's say, for example, you know, I'm very visual. I like to see things. I like to, I look at things that way. When I give directions, I give visual markers. And so for me, I would respond better in a class where there's things on the board, they give handouts, there's visual medium, and the textbook's kind of organized that way. But what if I'm in a 3-hour night class that's straight lecture? And my preference is visual. That's
It's gonna be bored. It's gonna be, you're gonna feel tired.
right. That's going to be harder. It's going to require more energy for me to stay focused in that class. Do you see? But we don't have any control on the textbook or the class or how it's structured. So what could I do to make it more visual? Well, that's when we start looking in terms of adaptive behavior. Okay, well, my preference is to have things presented this way. But in this situation, if I take good notes and I read my chapter ahead of time and I kind of look at where things are and I relate it and I can imagine it and I can see it, I'll be able to remember it better than just sitting there going, this isn't a very good way for me to learn. So learning styles, you know, it's something so specific as, are you a morning person or a night person? Brain dominance, are you right brain or left brain dominant? Obviously, unless there's been trauma to any part of the brain, we have 2 hemispheres of our brain, but each of them function differently. The right side of the brain is associated with creativity, spontaneity, intuition, rhythm. It's also where our pictures are and our images. That's the right side of the brain. On the left side of the brain, it's associated with logic, language, number, rational thinking, and linear thought. So obviously, we want to use both sides of our brains in conjunction. A lot of times, study practices that incorporate the right side of the brain and the left side are stronger because it's both sides of the brains. So this is where classes that deal with learning theory or finding out more can really help you be a more efficient student. So that's a good thing. Also, our attitudes about learning. So that's a really important thing. If you say, I'm not good at math, I've never been good at math, I never will be good at math, that's kind of a predisposition, right? So what you realize is you are smart, you have skills that you could acquire, you already possess them, and it's about going out and finding out what are some ways to find those. So self-knowledge and awareness of your own strengths and weaknesses is a really important piece to start with. Also, how that relates is if, let's say, you're taking an English class, but you never really got the grammar piece, then you may want to consider taking a grammar class, just getting honest with, you know what, I do well with the writing, I have good ideas, and I have good thoughts, but I never really learned the grammar. Well, there might be a class on campus where you could take, actually, a grammar essentials class that would help you with that so that you would strengthen as a student. So this is why I teach college, you know, because it's more proactive. If you know you have a strength in this or a weakness in that, you can look to the steps you might need to take to improve that. Academic tutoring, taking a class, those kinds of things. The other thing is knowing about resources. So I'm going to go over here, and if you go under here and you click the department, you're already navigating this, obviously, to do your pause and things like that. And so if you do academic support, now they're going to have the MyQuest is going to be changing. It's for faculty this semester, and for students, that's going to be wonderful because I think it'll be much easier to navigate. As it stands now, when you come to the departmental pages and then you click on whatever it is, health center, EOPS, financial aid, you have to then click onto the home page as a reference. And you'll see, here's the lab, here's the courses, here's adjunct study, here's faculty, here's learning communities, our staff, resources, student success workshops, study guides. And this is kind of an interesting resource that there's specific skills on reading comprehension. There's these study guides on how to do that. Critical thinking, spelling guide, textbook study strategies. So there's resources within the college community. So checking out those kinds of things on campus. We have a health center. The library is an outstanding resource, not just about books. So you want to kind of get familiar with utilizing the campus resources, okay? So that's one thing. The other thing is that there's websites. For example, now if you do test taking, now look what we have here, 6 million Right. We don't want to go through all those, but look at what there is out there, and if it's affiliated with an EDU or a university or something, this is a particularly good one. The third one down is from Bucks Community College, where they talk about what to do before the test. And what I like about this particular website is it kind of relates to if they say something like why it's important to read and study in meaningful chunks or flashcards, each one of those you can hit and they'll give you specifics. And so it's really good, a good resource. So there's really a lot of excellent resources available to you online, many of which are from universities or colleges that can just help you on papers. And if you have a speech class or you have English 1A and you've got to write a research paper, we have the regular topics that seem to be interesting, but I think brain research and learning implications is really a wonderful topic to do research because it's self-interest, right? You could find out more for yourself as well. Okay, so resources are really important as well. The next one, number 3 on there, is making connections. How many of you have gone to see your instructors during their office hour? Okay, 1. Most students, I think office hours are underutilized. The instructor office hours. Now, are any of you in large forum classes? Are any of you in the big forum classes? Okay, what's the class?
History 7A.
Okay, History 7A. So here's the issue with large forum classes. It's when you have a lot of students, it's much harder to make a connection with the instructor. So as a general rule, they've done research on where you sit in the large forum classes. So the first 5 rows are pretty good, but after that, there's a lot more distractions and things. So if you are in a large forum, sit close to the front, at least 5 rows, because it helps you to be more connected, and there's less distractions. And what they show statistically is the notes are better, and those students get higher grades. So you don't know, is it the A-B students that sit towards the front, or is it a result of the fact they're sitting towards the front? It's interesting where we sit in the class. So get to know your instructors, make a connection with them. We all have office hours, and it's a great opportunity if you're confused about something or not sure to just say, I'm studying for the test, but I'm not exactly sure. Could you give me some pointers on how? You'll be amazed at how straightforward your instructors will be with, oh, thank you for coming, and here's some ideas. So utilize that. Also, you want to utilize other students. I was going to bring a transparency today that shows that the percentage of what we learn, we tend to only remember about 10% of what we read, 20% of what we hear. But what we teach, we tend to remember about 90% of that. So that interaction with other students, talking about concepts and ideas, is a really good way to learn. And so I always am amazed at how students can go through 18 weeks of class and not know anyone in their classes. That just seems wrong to me. And I think the way to do that is to make some connections with a few students in a class that have similar interests so that you can exchange notes, you can study together, and in college that's a really important piece. So look at ways in which you can get connected. Also, connecting with other students, but also any clubs or organizations like international students, the reentry program. There's people on campus to get involved with. The time management and organizational skills. There is a nice handout in your book, in your little packet here, that gives you some specifics on how to fill out a study schedule. People that are normally planners, they love plans. They thrive on them, they're organized, they have to-do lists, they have daily schedules, and that comes very natural for them because that's their preference. How many of you are like that? You study systematically, you're pretty organized, you know what's due. Okay, so that's a preference, and it's maybe a brain dominance preference as well. Now, how many of you tend to be kind of spontaneous, seat of your pants, study in moods, and if you're not in the mood, it's not a good thing, procrastinate, and tend to like to not be too organized that way, okay? So that's knowing that. There are some times when it's really nice to be kind of spontaneous and free, and creative, but there's other times where that may not support you academically. So what you want to do is adapt some of the thinking strategies and behaviors of the more organized individual. And you can still work within your own lifestyle. So this particular handout is a really good one to kind of look at, okay, the first thing it says, your schedule should fit your needs. It should include both recreational and personal time. So balance. Do you know the average for every hour you're in class, how many hours you're supposed to spend outside of class? Do you know what the average
Wow.
is? Yeah, it's 2. It's about 2, but some classes will be more and some classes will be less. So that's what a big transition for college students is. You may only be in class 5, 6 hours a week, and yet 12 to 15 units is a full-time load. Why is it a full-time load? It's that calibration of the outside of class, doing your homework. When you think about your high school learning, a lot of your time doing your homework and stuff was spent in class, actually doing it in class. So that's a big adjustment. So as it relates to time management, what you want to think about is that we each get 24 hours in the day to 168 hours in a week. That equals 1 week. Organized people do not get any more or less time than unorganized people. It's an equal opportunity resource, time. So how we spend, if this is a pie of how we spend our time and it's 168 hours, what we value is a reflection of how we spend our time. So what's interesting is how many of you are full-time students? Okay, so close. So a full-time student equals 12 to 15 units, right? That's full-time. That's 40 hours. 30 to 40 hours a week, per week. How many of you are working? Okay, are you working full-time or part-time? Okay, so look at this. If you're working full-time as a job, that's also 40 hours. Now let's do the math. If you had 168 hours, roughly half of that is work and school. So if you're a full-time student and working full-time, that's the equivalent of 2 full-time jobs. Now, I'm not suggesting you quit your job or quit school, but it's the reality of, let's talk sleep. What percentage of your pie? Do you see what I'm saying? So where does it fit in? So that's where you want to look at. Number one, you want to develop some good habits so you study efficiently because you don't have a lot of time, but also you want to be able to balance the things that are important to you. Exercise, family, school, all those things. And that's a fine part. So balance and flexibility are 2 really important components of any meaningful time organization or plan, is to try to balance it out. And when you start a new semester, don't you find, like, how am I going to do all this? When am I going to study? And how is it all going to work out? And a big part of that is to have a plan where you actually set aside time if it's time to exercise. You actually plan it. You schedule it. So if you're not a natural scheduler, that'd be easy for you. But if you're not, that might be something, those of you that mentioned what you want to get out of this is time management, is to actually try out a plan and schedule it and try to follow it and then revise it. Okay? So that's a good thing. Also, you want to think about your best time of day. You want to think about studying your harder subjects first. And short incremental study spread throughout the day tends to be better than long marathon study. Now, if you're really busy, now you can see my speaking rate is increasing, right? Because I have much more to... See, this is ironic. I'm talking about time management and organization, and it's like, and I have one more to talk about on here. So that's all right. Learning is that way. There's always more. And this is really good stuff, this whole concept. And you have handouts that you can refer to. But the important part about this is that it's an ongoing process, and it can really help you with that. The last one on my paper is the segment on cultivating a systematic approach to learning. And this is tremendous. It's having a system that you can use, whether it's reading your textbook, setting a purpose why you're doing what you're doing. It's not just asking like, oh, okay, what do I have to learn in that class, and just memorizing it, but it's actually thinking about how the teacher's asking you questions. What questions might they ask? Why do we have to do this assignment in class? How does it relate to my other assignments? How much of our textbook will we be tested on? What kind of tests? Those kinds of questions will get your mind actively involved. And this is really important. When you're reading your textbook, you need to have a system. You don't just open it up and read it. You think, what do I have to do with this textbook? Am I going to be tested on it? How important is it to the content of the lecture? What would be the best way to read this? Can I kind of look at the heading? You know what I mean? You actually ask yourself questions before you start doing what you're doing so that you're actually actively involved. So you don't get down the bottom of the page and have no clue what you just read. So you want to write this down, my 2 gems. I want to give you something before you go that research has substantiated, and I do in all my classes. I've taught English, I've taught, now I teach exclusively college success. If you're interested in the concepts and in many of the presentations that are presented in the workshops, I highly recommend taking the Academic Skills 25 College Success class. It's about, more specifically about all these topics that I've been addressing minimally today. But if you do nothing else all semester long, I would like you to think about doing these 2 gems, which are really important pointers or skills or habits. One is you should review your notes within 24 hours. And the other thing I want to say about the reviewing of your notes is it could be your textbook notes. It could be textbook notes, it could be class notes, not just exclusively lecture. And there's a reason for this. The reason is we lose 80% of what we hear if we don't. That is not because you have a bad memory. It is the limitations of short-term memory. And there's a reason why we call short-term memory short. It is. It can only hold so much and only for so long. The research on memory, forgetting begins almost immediately, 20 minutes. Because as the new information comes in, it pushes out the information that was already there. So if you think about writing notes in your class, and you're scribbling, trying to write all those notes, when's the next time you look at your notes? When do most students look at their notes? Right before the test, right? So that's not a good time. Actually, what you want to do is review them within 24 hours. But the sooner, the better. Okay, definitely. As soon as you can review them. It doesn't take long, because when you go through that process of review, what you're doing is you're moving information from your short-term memory and you're moving it into your long-term memory. And the characteristic of long-term memory is that it's permanent, short of injury, disease, or death. Anything that we take in through our 5 senses and that is stored in our long-term memory is there for retrieval. Now, obviously, as students, that we do forget, don't we? We forget by not using information. We don't know where it is, and maybe in our brain somewhere, but we can't connect to it. But the important piece here as it relates to you as students is that when you move information from short-term to your long-term memory, as a student, that's what you work on is memory techniques to remember for the test or whatever, what information you want to remember. So that's a really important thing. How many of you already do this? You review your notes on reading or lecture. You already do it as soon as after you take it. How many of you do this? Okay, so this is a really good one. So you know what? You're not going to remember to do it, but if you make a note to yourself, review my notes. Just try it out. I think you'll be amazed at how much better that will help you. In addition, right before your class session starts, review those notes again. Because then if it's a pop quiz or they ask a question, because remember in class we talked about such and so, it's right there. And you're working on those neural traces or memory paths. And the second gem, whenever a teacher presents 2, you're going to go, okay, where does that go? The second gem is to read your assignments. Prior to the lecture. So notice I didn't say read chapter assignments, because maybe your assignment is to read a short story or read the syllabus or read some, whatever it is, it's really important that you read it before you actually go to lecture. And the reason for that is that how the brain works. The brain works, as we said earlier, from the known to the unknown. And the brain loves organization. So by looking at your chapter and reading it, you have the big picture. You have what the big picture means. It's like if this is a piece of a puzzle, and you have to put that together, well, just pretend that's a piece of a puzzle. It'd be a lot easier to know where that piece of the puzzle goes if you had a picture of what the puzzle looked like, right? And this is green, and this is the only part of the puzzle that's green. It's going to be more efficient placing it in the right place. That's how our learning works. If we overview the chapter, we read it before we get into class, when the teacher talks about it, we're relating the new information to what we already know. So what this does is it activates, and this is why it's so important, it activates prior knowledge, what you already know, and it gives a meaningful context. Oh, this is a stinky pen. A meaningful context for the learning. These are two really important habits that if you could get in the habit of doing this, I think you'll be really amazed how it will help you academically. It'll help you with tests, it'll help you with review, and then the piece about predicting test questions, once again, before I close up here, is that last page. It talks, this is a really good page, where it talks about levels of learning and applying what you know, that a lot of introductory college questions are from those objective tests, true, false, multiple choice, are just knowledge base. What do you know? And then kind of having a good memory. But in college instructors assume that students know how to think and reason on those more sophisticated levels of thinking. Not only the who, what, where, when questions, the facts, but why, how, what if, and that is in the realm of higher level, more sophisticated thinking. So what's really nice about this handout, you don't need me to just read this. It kind of goes through, it talks about the different levels from the simplest or least sophisticated to more sophisticated. It's what skills are demonstrated, what kinds of questions do teachers ask, and then sample of test questions. So this is a really good thing when you're looking at predicting test questions, because in your class, if your teacher says, who did this? When did that happen? What happened next? Factual based. You know, you have something to refer back to, and look at your notes.